changes, and we can start seeing the kind of shift which is happening. We've managed to do in Canada before, when we built the railroads, when we fought the Second World War, when we built the sort of Keynesian state after the Second World War, and that social safety net, which now is under stress, and we need to change some of that for changing times. But definitely, those were all accomplishments to be proud of, and I think that made Canada a better place. Responding to climate change, getting that green energy revolution, I think, is the kind of thing that is a task for our generation in the way that, say, fighting the Second World War or building a better society were for our parents' or grandparents' generations. The government of Alberta is spending $25 million on a PR campaign. The oil companies are investing massively in PR campaigns to try and defend dirty oil. Part of what we've been doing is going and talking to investors and pointing out that this is actually a risky investment. You might think there's money to be made here, but if when you look at the sort of climate rules that are pending, this is going to be pretty risky for your investments. And a lot of investors are starting to think about that because you get limited benefits by appealing to people's better natures, but when you sort of appeal to their pocketbooks and their better natures, you bring those two together, it's a good combo. The challenge is, we've sort of done things a certain way for a long time. We think about rising energy use as just part of the good life, and that's what it was. But I think part of what we have to do is redefine the good life to be about sort of living within the boundaries of one planet. Because right now, the average Canadian uses enough resources that we would need 4 planets. And outside of a few of my favorite episodes of Star Trek, there really aren't 3 other planets out there waiting for us right now. So we either learn to live within this one, or we face disaster. The number one thing is to use less, to do the tasks that we need. Rather than thinking about how many liters of gasoline are we going to use, or how much electricity are we going to use. If you want to get from point A to point B, if you get to do it by using more gasoline, it's not like you feel better about that because it costs you more. So the number one is things like stopping urban sprawl, investing in public transit, starting to move towards oil-free forms of transportation. And I think the plug-in hybrid vehicles are a step there, because it's a lot easier to take the carbon and the pollution out of electricity than it is out of liquid fuels. Ethanol's sort of like gasoline, but it actually isn't all that different, which is a problem. In terms of where we'd be getting energy from, you'd be having things like, here in Toronto, we'd probably be looking at a wind farm out in Lake Ontario. We'd be looking at having solar panels on people's homes. We'd be looking at having district heating and cooling systems, using geothermal energy from under the ground to help heat and cool our homes. And actually, interesting, the City of Toronto just passed a bylaw that said, there's like 17 different bylaws that said you couldn't do these things. So they passed one bylaw that said, okay, we want people to put up solar panels, wind turbines, use earth energy. So unless there's a really good reason why you can't, you're allowed to do this. And that's the kind of part of what we need to do, is sort of take some of those red tape barriers that stand in the way of solutions, because we've never done it this way before, and say, okay, we actually want to do these things. How can we help make this happen? And when you'd be building and buying new buildings, whether it's homes or office buildings, they'd be providing their own energy. Right now we think about, you buy a building and then you buy energy separately. You'd be buying it as a package deal. And it's a very different way of doing things. It's going to take some time to make that switch, but you'd be looking at the City of Toronto's Transit City Plan with electric vehicles helping people get around, and having public transit really work for people, able to get them there timely, comfortably, and going where they need to go. You'd be looking at having buildings providing their own power, and you'd also be looking at those buildings using a lot less power than they do today. And the great thing is, there's a lot of jobs in this. One of the things the city is looking at doing is wrapping the old concrete buildings built back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Toronto has the highest concentration of these old concrete buildings outside of Moscow. And they're actually incredibly, the bones of those buildings are great, they're just incredibly energy inefficient. But what they've been doing in Europe is wrapping them in insulation. At the same time, you can actually put in those geothermal heating and cooling systems, putting solar panels on the roof, and taking these sort of 50, 60-year-old buildings and turning them into sort of brand new eco buildings. And the people living in them actually end up with a better building, and they end up with lower energy bills, and the city ends up with cleaner air and doing its bit towards fighting climate change. It's there's a lot of things that come together. Of course, you'd have to pay people to do that. But those are the types of jobs we need.
Right, and it comes back to foresight. People willing to invest in that to get the long-term benefits.
And part of this is about, developing some innovative finding mechanisms. Manitoba has basically loaning people to put in geothermal heating and cooling systems because they said, well, this makes a lot of sense. It's a big upfront cost. It'll save people money in the long run. Most people don't have the $10,000 or $15,000 sitting in their bank account right now. So why don't we loan them the money, and then they'll pay for it out of their energy bill over the next 10 years. So their energy bill stays the same as what it was or goes down a little bit.
Right.
But after 10 years, it drops dramatically, and they paid it off. In the same way in California, what they're doing is starting to put the cost of energy retrofits and putting on solar panels and those types of things onto repaying it out of your property taxes. So if you sell the home, part of the problem is people often don't stay in their home long enough to recoup an investment that's going to take 10 years. So if you attach the loan to the building rather than the individual, in California what they're doing is, that way if you sell the home, the person who buys it gets the solar panels and they continue paying for them. So you don't have to think, am I going to be in this home long enough for this to pay back? It's ultimately, everyone's better off because you're getting the green energy, you're actually going to be reducing the long-term energy bills for that building, making it a more attractive building, and it gets over some of the short-term disincentives. And those are the types of solutions which we need here, and we need them now.
Right.
And I think it's the kind of thing which would be politically popular. And this is where the UN recently came out with a report calling for what they called a new Green Deal. Very much modeled on the sort of New Deal of the Roosevelt era, where we've got to put people to work. And what they did was they built infrastructure. I mean, Roosevelt actually planted vast numbers of trees to protect watersheds, for which I think we should all thank him. And Canada did the same kind of thing. They created the conservation authorities to protect watersheds so that we would actually have clean drinking water, because they recognized that the development that had been going on and the logging in those areas was leading to people having water that was making them sick. So if we can get that kind of a new Green Deal and start building those solutions, investing in those climate solutions, the windmills, the energy efficiency, the insulation, the solar panels, the public transit, the much more efficient vehicles, then I think we actually have some hope. And this is something, I think this is something where its time might have come, because you hear this, coming from the UN, you hear it coming from the President-elect of the United States of America, you hear it coming from the European Union, but the only place I'm not hearing it from right now is Canadian political leadership, but I think they're catching up fast, and I think a lot of the Canadian public is way ahead of them on this.